Part 1. At the time, Jake had just turned 20. It felt like a grown-up age, but his mind was still a whirlwind, half of his thoughts consumed by plans to hang out with his friends, while the other half wandered into daydreams about finding a girl to connect with. It was during this phase that his mother announced, "Honey, my old friend is coming over." He merely shrugged in response, thinking, sure, why not? His mother had friends like mushrooms after rain, one after another, a parade of familiar faces, some from work, others from the neighborhood. Most of them were the same, dull, complaining about life, sipping tea in the kitchen, and offering unsolicited advice on how to raise children. But this time was different. When she walked in, Jake immediately sensed something unusual. She looked to be in her early 40s, maybe a bit older, with a ponytail that swung as she moved. But it was her eyes that caught him off guard, deep, dark, and intense, the kind of gaze he had only seen in movies. There was a predatory glint, as if she had spent her life observing others' mistakes and learned how to turn them to her advantage. Her figure was not that of a young girl, but it had a certain strength to it. Her hips were curvy, her chest held its shape, and she carried herself with confidence. There are women who don't attract the kind of romantic gaze but are impossible to ignore because they exude a powerful presence. His mother chirped happily, "Meet Lena. We've been friends since we were young and have been through a lot together." Lena smiled, but there was something in her smile that felt both warm and teasing, as if she were saying, "I see right through you." Her gaze lingered on Jake a moment longer than it should have, but his mother was too busy bustling around with tea and pastries to notice. Inside, Jake felt a flutter of something unfamiliar. They settled around the table, and his mother began her usual chatter about work, neighbors, and rising prices. But then Lena chimed in with comments that left Jake momentarily speechless. She casually mentioned prison and people who had betrayed him, all with a nonchalance that made it sound as ordinary as a trip to the grocery store. He sat there, pretending to be calm while his insides churned. Wow, his mother's friend was something else. While his mother was in the kitchen, Lena lit a cigarette by the window and then turned to him, as if it were a casual remark, "So, you're 20, huh? Still young, but already a man." Jake nearly choked on his tea. She smelled of more than just tobacco. There was a sharp perfume, cheap but oddly fitting for her character. The combination of smoke, her fragrance, and her laughter seeped under his skin. He attempted to joke, saying, "Yeah, 20, but still a fool." She replied, "Fool or not, what matters is that you've got guts. The rest will follow," and laughed heartily. It was clear that conversations with her would be anything but dull. She didn't shy away from throwing out comments that a typical woman wouldn't say in front of someone else's son. She could bluntly ask, "Do you have a girlfriend?" and look at him so intently that he felt she was more interested in him than in any girl. He found himself intrigued by her past, which should have repelled him but instead drew him in. Who else in his life spoke so directly about life's messiness, about people, without pretending everything was pristine? She was real, and that was both frightening and alluring. Later, when his mother left for the store, it was just the two of them. Jake sat on the couch, trying to focus on the TV, while Lena positioned herself across from him, stretching her legs out and watching him as if deciding whether to say something. After a moment, she sighed and said, "Don't think I'm all that scary. Life's just been tough for me." In that instant, Jake thought, what if? But he quickly dismissed the thought, realizing how absurd it was. What was he thinking? She was his mother's friend, an adult woman whose life had been shaped in ways he couldn't fathom. Yet, a voice inside him whispered, "It's not that simple." He had no idea that this was just the beginning. After that evening, Lena stayed longer than he had anticipated. At first, his mother said, "Just a couple of days until she sorts things out." But those couple of days stretched on. Jake didn't mind, their apartment was spacious, and there was room for everyone. However, he could feel the atmosphere shift. His mother went about her routine, work, gardening, chatting on the phone with friends, unfazed by the presence of someone with a past and habits that clearly disrupted their quiet life. Jake noticed every little detail. Lena moved through the house as if she owned it. Not arrogantly, but with a quiet confidence. She would stroll into the kitchen in her robe, casually pouring herself a cup of tea, leaving just enough of her figure exposed, as if she didn't care. It was a small thing, but for a 20-year-old guy, seeing that in his own home sent his heart racing. She would smoke by the window, and the smoke would cling to the curtains. His mother would sigh, "Lena, not again." But Lena would just smirk and reply, "Come on, your place is already smoky from the neighbors." Jake watched her, fascinated by how effortlessly she navigated every situation. With him, she maintained a unique dynamic. At first, it was casual comments, like noticing his athletic build or saying he was maturing right before her eyes, and that his mother must be proud. But there was always an underlying meaning in her words. He felt it, even if he couldn't articulate it. It was like a game. Jake was elbow-deep under the kitchen sink, wrestling with a stubborn faucet that refused to budge. He muttered under his breath, the soap suds slipping through his fingers as he twisted and turned the wrench. Just then, Lena strolled in, a casual presence that filled the room with an unexpected energy. She perched herself on a nearby stool, watching him with an amused expression. "Every man should have a golden head and golden hands," she remarked, breaking the silence. Jake nearly bumped his head against the pipe in surprise. He shot her a glance, half annoyed, half intrigued. "Well, let's see about the head," he replied, trying to keep his tone light, "but your hands seem fine." Lena laughed, a sound that danced through the air, and he felt his heart race. "Don't take it personally, I'm just teasing," she said, but he could see the delight in her eyes as she drew him out of his shell. Just then, his mother entered, her voice cutting through the moment. "Did you fix it?" she asked, oblivious to the tension that had just sparked between them. Jake's heart pounded as if he were sitting for an exam, while Lena maintained an innocent facade. As the days turned into weeks, Jake found himself increasingly captivated by Lena. She moved through their home with an ease that suggested she belonged there, her confidence both alluring and disarming. He caught himself daydreaming in class, her laughter echoing in his mind, her gaze lingering in his thoughts. "What's wrong with you?" he would scold himself. "She's just your mom's friend, an older woman with a past you can't even imagine." One afternoon, while his mother was visiting a neighbor, Jake found himself alone with Lena. She was in the kitchen, slicing apples with a casual grace. He wandered in, intending to grab a glass of water, but she turned to him, offering a piece of fruit. "Here, try this. It's sweet," she said, extending her hand. Their fingers brushed, and the touch lingered longer than necessary. He looked into her eyes, and for a moment, the air felt thick, charged with something unspoken. He mumbled a thank you and retreated, his heart racing as he left the kitchen. Lena was playing a game, and he knew it, yet he couldn't decipher the rules. Sometimes, he thought she might take a step closer, but then she would switch back to discussing mundane topics with his mother, as if nothing had happened. He began to notice a change in himself. He lingered at home more often, drawn to her presence. He used to rush out to meet friends, but now he found solace in the moments spent near her, even if it was just to catch her eye or hear her voice. One evening, his mother announced she would be late from work. "Just feed yourselves," she called out as she left. Jake felt a mix of anticipation and anxiety as he realized he was alone with Lena again. The television droned on in the background, but neither of them paid it any mind. Lena sat at the kitchen table, a cigarette in one hand and a steaming mug in the other. He approached her, compelled by an invisible force. "Sit down," she said, nudging a stool toward him with her foot. "We need to talk." He hesitated but complied, taking a seat across from her. They sat in silence for a moment, the tension palpable. Finally, she exhaled a cloud of smoke toward the window and asked, "Do you think I'm ugly?" The question caught him off guard. "No," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're just different." She smirked, a knowing look in her eyes. "Different is putting it mildly. I spent 6 years in prison." "Do you know what that means?" He nodded slowly, unsure of how to respond. "It means there are no fairy tales or princes. Just dirt and truth. You either rot or become someone like me." Jake studied her, sensing the weight of her words. There was no self-pity in her tone, she spoke as if she were sharing the weather forecast. "Your mother thinks I've changed," she continued, a hint of laughter in her voice. "But people don't really change. We just get used to our own cockroaches." He nodded again, feeling a pull to ask more, to delve deeper into her world. "You probably hate having me here," she said suddenly, her tone shifting. "Why would I?" he asked, genuinely puzzled. "Because it's normal," she replied, squinting at him. "Be honest. Do you think about me?" The directness of her question stunned him. He choked on his breath, caught off guard. I think about you, but not in the way you might think," he managed to say. She laughed, the sound rich and teasing. "How do you think?" Jake felt his cheeks flush as he fumbled for words, feeling like a kid on the spot. She watched him with an intensity that made him squirm, as if she enjoyed the way he struggled with her silence. "You know," she finally said, "I was 20 once too. I sat here with older guys, and they always had one question in their eyes, when?" "And what did you say?" he asked, leaning in, captivated. "Sometimes, never." "Sometimes, too soon," she replied, her gaze steady. The honesty in her words sent a shiver down his spine. It was a conversation unlike any he'd ever had, far removed from the trivialities of college life and friendships. "Do you know what's the scariest part?" she asked suddenly. "It's not the sitting, or the betrayals. It's getting used to living without illusions. You look at someone, and you just know they're lying." He fell silent, absorbing her words. "And you?" she pressed, poking him lightly with her finger. "But that won't last. Life will break you eventually." "The question is how hard," she said, her voice a mix of warning and prophecy. Jake sat there, contemplating whether he should even be having this conversation. But he couldn't leave, he was drawn in. "You're a smart guy," she added, her tone shifting. "I see it, and your mother is proud of you. But you're too soft, and they break the soft ones first." He opened his mouth to respond, but the words caught in his throat. Then, unexpectedly, she took his mug, took a sip, and set it back down. The simple act felt more intimate than any touch he could imagine. They sat there until the early hours of the morning, her stories painting vivid pictures of her past, fighting for cigarettes, losing friends, a man who promised to wait but married someone else. And as she spoke, Jake felt the world around him fade away, leaving only the two of them in that dimly lit kitchen, bound by secrets and unspoken desires. Jake sat in the dimly lit kitchen, the weight of Lena's words hanging in the air like smoke from a cigarette. She had shared pieces of her life, stories that felt raw and real, and he felt as if he were peeling back layers of her soul. He nodded along, feeling a fracture form within himself as he realized that this woman knew more about life than all his college classes combined. As she prepared to leave for the night, she turned to him and said something that would echo in his mind for days: "Never trust anyone completely. Not even me, especially not me." With that, she slipped away into her room, leaving him alone with his thoughts. Though he had never smoked, that night he craved a cigarette, desperate for something to dull the chaos swirling inside him. After that evening, everything shifted between them. They hadn't spoken about it, but an invisible thread seemed to stretch taut between Jake and Lena. Every time he entered the kitchen, she was already there, her gaze burning into him like a brand. Their mother remained blissfully unaware, lost in her own world of work and phone calls, while they played their silent game. One afternoon, Jake was hunched over his laptop, struggling with a paper, when Lena appeared in the doorway, leaning casually against the frame. "What's up?" he asked, glancing up. "Nothing," she replied, a sly smile creeping across her face. "You look serious." "Just working on this paper," he muttered, feeling the heat rise in his cheeks. She stepped closer, her breath brushing against him as she leaned over his shoulder, her hand resting lightly on his. The touch sent a shiver down his spine. "You're too stubborn," she said softly. "Don't be afraid to live." He tensed but didn't pull away. She lingered for a moment before retreating, leaving him to wonder what had just happened. The next encounter came later that night. Their mother had gone to bed, and Jake ventured into the kitchen for a glass of water. The light was on, and there was Lena, draped in a robe, her leg crossed over the other. A long, jagged scar marred her knee, and when she caught him staring, she smirked. "Like it?" "It's a memory," she said. "Did it hurt?" he asked, unsure why he was probing. "It hurts when you get betrayed," she replied, her tone heavy with meaning. "Everything else is bearable." She adjusted her robe, pulling it higher, and Jake found himself at a loss for where to look. He tried to maintain his composure, but he could feel the heat radiating from his ears. "You're blushing," she teased, a playful glint in her eye. "No, I'm not," he protested, but she only laughed softly, sending chills down his spine. She handed him a glass, their fingers brushing against each other longer than necessary. Her gaze locked onto his, and he realized she was toying with him. The next day, they found themselves washing dishes together. Jake scrubbed while Lena dried, and as she leaned in closer, her shoulder brushed against his. The scent of her cheap, sharp perfume filled the air, and he froze. "What's scary?" she whispered, her voice low and intimate. He turned to her, speechless, her eyes sparkling with mischief and challenge. "You know this isn't a game," she said softly, and just as quickly, she pulled back, snapping the dish towel with a bright smile. "All clean." "Good job." His heart raced as he stood there, feeling as if he had just sprinted a mile. Nights became the hardest. He lay awake, tossing and turning, listening for every sound she made in the hallway. The creak of her door sent his heart racing, and he fought the urge to confess everything to her. But her words echoed in his mind, especially "not me." It felt like she was leading him to the edge, daring him to take the plunge, but the risk was his alone to take. The climax of their tension came one evening when they found themselves alone in the living room. Their mother had gone out, leaving them in a charged silence. Lena turned on some music softly and settled beside him on the couch, stretching her legs out. "Do you know what's the most dangerous thing about a woman?" she asked, her voice casual. "What?" he replied, his pulse quickening. "When she knows you want her, but she doesn't give you a yes or a no." Jake froze, realizing the weight of her words. It felt like a confession, yet she delivered it as if discussing the weather. "What do you want?" he blurted out, unable to contain himself. She smiled, leaning closer, her warmth enveloping him. "I want you to figure it out for yourself," she whispered, then pulled back, leaving him reeling. He sat in the empty room long after she left, trying to process everything. She had backed him into a corner, leaving only one way out, to step forward. But was he ready? Or was this all just a game to see how far she could push a 20-year-old? That night burned in his memory, seared into his mind like a brand. The next day, he tried to distract himself, hanging out with friends, playing soccer, and drinking beer outside their apartment. But the unease lingered. He knew she was home, and like a moth to a flame, he would return to her. He came back late, their mother already asleep. The apartment was quiet, the only sound the ticking of the clock in the kitchen. He lay down, but sleep eluded him. Staring at the ceiling, all he could see was Lena, sitting on the couch, bringing a cigarette to her lips, looking straight into his soul. After what felt like an eternity, he realized he couldn't stay still any longer. He slipped out of bed, careful not to creak the floorboards, and made his way to the kitchen. The dim, yellow light caught his attention, and he froze. There she was, wearing a long tank top, sitting at the table, smoking. An ashtray and a cup of tea sat before her. She looked up, unfazed by his presence. "Can't sleep?" she asked softly. He shrugged, unsure of what to say. "Come here," she beckoned. He sat across from her, and she extinguished her cigarette, her gaze piercing through him, lingering in silence before a crooked smile appeared on her lips. "Well, here we are." Liam sat across from Lena in the dimly lit kitchen, the tension thick enough to slice through. "What do you mean?" he finally managed to ask, his voice barely above a whisper. "You knew I would come out," she replied calmly, her eyes glinting with mischief. "And I knew you would too. Men always come out." He fell silent, his throat dry, heart pounding so loudly he was sure the neighbors could hear it. Lena reached for his mug, pouring him some tea and sliding it across the table. "Drink this, so your hands don't shake." He picked it up but couldn't bring himself to sip. Suddenly, she reached out, her fingers brushing against his palm, deliberate and warm. "You know," she said softly, "you're a good guy. Too good, actually. I'd be scared if I were you." Scared of what, he thought, but the question never left his lips. She smiled, a knowing look in her eyes that sent a shiver down his spine. The air was electric, and he felt as if he were teetering on the edge of something monumental. "You started this," he said, trying to regain control. "What?" she interrupted, a laugh escaping her lips, light and teasing. "I'm just showing you that life can be like this. Without rules." She leaned closer, and he could feel the warmth radiating from her skin. Inside, a voice screamed, "Stop. Your mother is right there. This isn't allowed." But his body didn't listen. They sat in silence, the world outside fading away. Then, she leaned in even closer, almost touching, and whispered, "So, are you ready to see how brave you really are?" He froze, caught in her gaze, the moment stretching infinitely. But just as quickly, she pulled back, stood up, took a sip from her mug, and said nonchalantly, "Go to bed. Tomorrow will tell." He sat there, stunned, the weight of her words crashing over him. "What about you?" he finally managed to ask. "I'm fine," she smirked, her eyes sparkling with secrets. "I already know everything." With that, she left the kitchen, leaving him alone with his racing thoughts. For 10 minutes, he sat there, feeling like a fool. What had just happened? A test? A game? Or was she just as scared to take the next step? He crawled into bed, but sleep eluded him. Every nerve in his body was alive, buzzing with the possibilities of what could have been. He realized that this night would haunt him forever, not for what happened, but for what almost did. Eventually, he drifted off, only to dream of her laughing, walking down the hallway, calling his name. He woke up in a cold sweat, heart racing as if he had run a marathon. One thought echoed in his mind: she had won. The next morning, he woke up feeling shattered. His head throbbed as if he had been drinking all night instead of tossing and turning in bed. He stumbled into the kitchen where sunlight poured through the window. His mother was busy at the stove, and there was Lena, sitting at the table, sipping her coffee as if nothing had happened. She looked up, met his gaze, and smiled as if they had just been discussing the weather yesterday. "Good morning, hero," she said, a teasing lilt in her voice. Liam froze, trying to decipher whether it was a joke or something more. But before he could respond, his mother chimed in, "Sit down, honey. Breakfast is ready." The mundane atmosphere wrapped around him like a heavy blanket, but inside, he felt a fire. He sat down, eating in silence while Lena occasionally threw glances his way, each one like a jolt to his nerves. He tried to avoid her gaze, but it only made things worse. It felt like she was playing a game, and he was the unwilling participant. His mother rambled on about the neighbors' complaints and rising prices, but Liam barely heard her. He was lost in his thoughts, replaying Lena's words from breakfast. What did she mean by "you're good at keeping a straight face"? Just then, his mother stepped away to grab her phone, and Lena leaned in closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're doing a great job keeping it together." He nearly dropped his fork. He wanted to respond, but his mother returned, and the moment slipped away, returning to the ordinary. The day dragged on strangely. His mother took Lena to the market, and they spent hours discussing dresses, leaving him to pretend he was busy while his mind circled back to her earlier comment. What did it mean? Was it a challenge, a tease, or an acknowledgement of something unspoken between them? Later that evening, he found himself in the kitchen again, the house quiet. His mother had gone to bed, and Lena was pouring tea into mugs. She slid one across the table to him. "You've been on edge all day," she remarked, her eyes piercing through him. "And what do you think?" he shot back, frustration bubbling over. She chuckled softly, taking a sip before meeting his gaze. "I think you take everything too seriously. Sometimes, a night is just a night." And with that, she walked away, leaving him to grapple with the weight of her words. For him, that night had been anything but ordinary. It had turned his world upside down, while for her, it seemed to be just another fleeting moment. In that instant, he realized she had likely known all along what she was doing to him, how he would get caught in the web of unspoken words and emotions. But there was no turning back now. He was in the game, and there was no way out. As he lay in bed that night, he felt like a pawn in someone else's play. He was a 20-year-old who thought he understood life, but he was merely a piece in a much larger game. Just a night, she had said. But for him, it was anything but simple. It felt like a revelation, a harsh reminder that adults don't have to play by your rules. Days passed, and then she was gone. His mother saw her off to the bus station, and as Liam stood there, watching her leave, he felt a strange mix of relief and loss. He had learned something valuable, something that would linger long after she was gone. Life was unpredictable, and sometimes, the lines between right and wrong blurred in ways he never expected. As the bus pulled away, he took a deep breath, knowing that this was just the beginning of understanding the complexities of life and relationships. Subscribe to the channel,